Hi everyone, we're just welcoming everyone in. We're going to get started very shortly. In fact, we might go just another minute and then we'll kick things off. I think my bit at the beginning is the least important bit, so it won't matter if people miss that. Nice to see people as you're arriving. Just if you're arriving, just make sure your microphone is muted or someone will mute it on your behalf. So we try and keep the audio as clear as possible. I think. Oh, go on, Sue.
No, I was just going. It's kind of fabulous. You know, it's not the theatre, but you gradually see members of your audience one by one facing you in their chairs, and you're going, "Oh my God, this is." You know, I quite liked it when you were in the dark, but it's really nice seeing everybody.
I assume you've got a costume on as well, so I have high expectations.
When Graham and I do the flamenco, you'll see it.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone. Welcome as you're all arriving. My name is Simon Ellis. I'm a member of the team here at the Centre for Dance Research, Coventry University, and together with my colleague Lily Hayward-Smith, we are responsible for curating and organising what is called DaRE Invites. And today is a little bit special. Not because of who's coming, of course it's special because of who's coming, but also because this is the very last in a series which was called, or has been called, The Body and Science.
Features might differ. Some sounds have a...
Yeah. So this is the last in this series called The Body and Science, and it's featuring, as you all already know, Siobhan Davies and Claxton. The next series, which will be starting in the new year, is going to be called The Body and Land. And that's a special moment because it's the first time that's been announced. So before I introduce Guy and Sue, I'm never sure whether to call you in this context, Sue or Siobhan. I'm a little bit like, do I go more formal or?
I think in this very lovely gathering, we go Sue.
Okay, great.
Quite often people turn around and go, "Oh, it's lovely to meet you, Sue. When does Siobhan turn up?" Well, both of us are here.
Yes, I think I could tell a story about the first time I met you. I don't come off well in that particular exchange. Just to give you an idea of what's going to happen this afternoon, Guy and Sue are going to speak. They've described it as a fireside conversation. They're going to speak for about 30 minutes, at which point I'm going to let them know it's 30 minutes is up. We'll take a break then, stretch our legs. It might be a time or a little bit of a chance for you to think about how you might contribute to the conversation, and also perhaps to remind ourselves and each other that we're more than heads and shoulders on a screen. When you come back after that break, we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to be moderating, I guess, if that's the right word, that conversation. You can either put your strange yellow virtual hand up to indicate you want to ask something, or you can post something in the chat, and we'll get to you that way. And we'll be finishing no more than 90 minutes. Well, in fact, 87 minutes from now. We'll make sure we finish at the very latest on time. This session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, keep your camera off. And the video will be ready. The video of this will be ready on dareinvites.coventry.ac.uk. It'll be ready in a week or two. As ever, keep your device, whatever device you're using, keep it on mute while Sue and Guy are talking. Okay. So just to briefly introduce, I was thinking that there are people that who need no introduction and then go on to introduce them, which is always an odd thing in our language. But I'm going to briefly introduce them. So Sue is an associate professor here at the Centre for Dance Research. She's been a dancer, choreographer, filmmaker, and researcher for 50 plus years, and has been really curious about the way these different disciplines merge. And what it means to be in movement, not only within the dance field, but also beyond it. Sue's made a lot of work lots of work. And I'm not going to say any more, except I sort of think of Sue as a kind of mensch, a term I really love, this idea of someone who's wise and is supportive. So welcome, Sue, again.
Thank you.
And Guy Claxton is a cognitive scientist, education thought leader, and prolific author, which is absolutely true. Guy, I read Educating Ruby many years ago, which I think was my way into your work. Interested in expanding human intelligence through research, writing, and education. He's been based at different universities: Oxford, Bristol, King's College, and Winchester. And his work, I love this, it's increasingly taken on a more practical turn with a wide range of organizations where a better understanding of human intelligence is needed. And I'd probably suggest, Guy, you may not know this, but your book, Intelligence in the Flesh, is sort of verging on being essential reading, really, for those of us who are interested in movement and bodies and dance. So a huge welcome to you both for this last episode in this season called The Body and Science. So Lily's going to pin you, if that's the right word, and over to you both.
Thank you. I'm just wondering why my book is only verging on being essential reading.
I didn't want to give you a big head, that's all.
Well, I know many dancers who read what you have written, and that you have been really important to us. And thank you, Guy. Thank you, everybody who's here. It's lovely. And thank you, Simon and Lily. I think Guy and I have been curious about each other for quite a while. We have been involved in a few talks, and we know we come from very different disciplines. But I think mostly today we want to enjoy bringing out our complementary ideas and our ones that might challenge each other. So I believe, Guy, you have a question for me.
Yes, I do. I think just to reinforce, Sue, that we've deliberately decided to do this in a slightly unspun kind of way. So hopefully our brains will oblige by coming up with things that are worth saying and worth hearing. But here we go. Anyway, so this is the prep. This is the first question. When Sue and I were playing around with what some of the themes might be that we would discuss in our talk, we were swapping ideas with each other by email. And one thing leapt out at me in one of Sue's emails to me. She said, I have grandchildren, and watching them from day one is looking at a speeded up dance practice. So my first question is, what the hell does that mean, Sue? Could you unpack that for me?
Yeah, I'm okay. I think that I look at an infant and they need to learn to move to survive. So there is an urgency in their undertaking. And I think I like the idea that a dancer has urgency. It is within our capability to be in tune with everything within us and everything beyond us. And if we are really in tune with that, there is an urgency to us unpeeling some of that and making that available, either through more learning, performance, or whichever way we do it. So I like this idea of urgency. In terms of a speeded up practice, I see an infant repeating, and with every repetition, learning something. And if you wait for a few days, the infant changes. It changes its application to the moves that it becomes increasingly capable of. When I watch a dancer in the studio, I see them repeat, gain from the feedback of that action in order to encircle the movement round again and repeat, possibly round again and repeat. And I see the little infant moving in such a way that you know that they, and the dancer has already developed their musculature, their anatomical structure. But in order to fulfill I was about to say a greater purpose, and that sounds far too pretentious, but a greater capacity, then they also need to learn from every action they do if they can put themselves into that state. And that's a very hard state to maintain. But I think both the infant and the dancer are in a constant learning mode. And I find it moving.
In both senses of moving.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, very good. Lots of things already bubbling up in my head, Sue, as I listen to you talk. I just had an image of one of my personal development teachers from a long time ago, a man called Swami Anand Viresh, a black recovering drug addict from the USA, who was fond of saying, "Why walk when you can boogie?"
Yes.
Which I think is part of about one of the things that will come up in our conversation is about the extent to which adults, whether dancers or whoever, can recapture some of that mixture of playfulness and physical playfulness, experimentation, and joyfulness that perhaps are some of the attributes that you were seeing in your grandchildren. There is that kind of why walk, and you see that with children, don't you? Why walk? You can boogie.
Yeah.
It's like everything you are. There is a sense of urgency and purposefulness. They're probably trying to get from A to B, but getting from A to B can be coupled. It can be duplicated with having fun with your body, with a kind of playfulness or experimentation. And I think it's rather sad that grown-ups, with the exception of dancers, often, and the exception of John Cleese, perhaps, often lose that sense of physical playfulness. And one of the things that's around for me in our conversations is the tension between retaining fluidity and imaginativeness on the one hand, and developing a kind of efficient and economical repertoire of habits on the other. And there's some kind of built-in, for me, there's some kind of built-in tension or an unstable equilibrium between those two modes. I don't know if that means anything to you.
It does. I would like to think that very particularly the dancer doesn't separate those modes in a binary way. I sense that underpinning us is all the movement experience within the everyday that we have runs through our body without us even realizing it. So we are already underpinned by how we have learned to be in and of this world through every movement that we do. And then it is useful for us to extend that as much as we wish. Sometimes we may extend it very little and simply show everyday movement, maybe within a choreographed structure, so that both us and those watching can turn around and look at an everyday purposeful movement and be in wonder with it, because actually the fact that we move as richly as we do is wonderful. And I've got a question for you turning up, is imagination or placing image in the body is something that maybe the new infant doesn't do, but dancers, I feel, immediately start to wash themselves through with certain imaginative forces. And I just wondered from you, where does imagination sit in science? And is there
Let me, it's a great question. And I'll come back to it. But I want to leave hanging, because it's a real, your insistence that these two modes are somehow not to be differentiated. And I'm kind of sitting here with a sort of koan about how it is possible not to toggle between being disciplined and being spontaneous, as a dancer has to be both of those things. But how is it possible to be both of those things at once? Or an actor to be Judi Dench on stage repeating the same actions and the same lines for the 117th time in a long-running play, and for each time those words come out of her mouth, for them to seem and sound as if they are a spontaneous upwelling of her own curiosity or fear or whatever it may be. I'm genuinely puzzled by, and it sounds like you have a clearer sense of this than I do at the moment, by how those two modes can be welded together more closely than I want to think about it.
So good. I think it's something to do with layering. So one thing doesn't follow the other or precede the other. We are one. We are our experience is one experience with millions of cells of activity held within that one experience. So I think I sense if I dropped a core sample through my body and drew it up, then layered within that core sample are all both the dance and the day-to-day. And it may be that I simply have to make more transparent between these layers of complex information to know that I can be at the moment of giving information to an audience, or to a reader. The all of me is there enough. And if I've divided it up too much, then I might appeal to one audience more than another, but I don't think that I would be benefiting the art of dance by trying to keep myself divided, or to appear to be divided, or to use a divided self.
So I mean, no, it's interesting. I mean, maybe we don't want to spend too long on this, but I've worked a bit with sports psychology, sports people, footballers. I used to work with the head of what's called the youth development program, young footballers who were showing promise in the Football Association. And one of the things that we were talking about was actually relying on that separation, was actually to develop parallel mindsets. So they would set up a little prototypical game, let's say 5-a-side or 7-a-side or whatever it might be. And their instruction was to absolutely not, in one version, absolutely not care a fig about scoring a goal, but to be completely inventive, to be completely creative, to live within that world of spontaneous upwelling, don't know how this is going to turn out, and then perhaps half an hour later juggle the teams around and say, now play with disciplined earnestness as if your life and your soul depended on winning this match. And it was quite a lot of coaches don't understand that those two different modes exist. But you're absolutely right that I think when people are at the peak of their game, they manage to, as it were, re-weld those two modes together. So watching Cristiano Ronaldo in his heyday, for example, was to watch someone who was exhibiting simultaneously incredible discipline and incredibly high levels of playfulness. It's like he would enjoy playing with the opposition. and playing with the football, but to do that within a context of intense discipline and practice.
When an image that I use, and it's again something I love about a dance practice, and I think it would definitely appear in many others, but there's the moment when I wish that I am the dance, and that the body I am is the dance. And then there's a moment where I feel as if I'm on a Mobius strip, where I'm on the same plane, but I twist into the plane with an altered perspective. And in that altered perspective, I start to critique what I'm doing, to notice what I'm doing from an outside point of view. And then you return back to the plane where you're the immediate self. And I think it's a skill that it's good when you get better at it. And when you can apply, okay, now I am the material, now I switch to make a different observation of it, and then try and take that observation back as you then become the material again.
So it's almost as if like there's two modes are coexistent, but perhaps one could be foreground and the other, which one is in the foreground might shift. I was thinking from a scientific point of view, there's a great fat tome that I don't know if it's had any impact on the art world the dance world, by a man called Ian McGilchrist, called The Master and His Emissary, rather gendered language, but he's going way beyond the kind of old stuff about left brain and right brain, a much more sophisticated version of that. But perhaps, to put that very simply, maybe the answer to my conundrum about how you can be both holistic and analytical, both purpose-driven and playful at the same time, is because we have two brains that are capable of coexisting, of being alive at the same time. But as we were just saying, maybe it's possible that one is more in the ascendant than the other. And Ian argues in that book, of course, that the more disciplined, analytical, purpose-driven, focused one has become preemptive, has become the mode in which we live. And within that mode, we can become kind of efficient and predictable, but have lost a huge amount of that ability to boogie or to play or to be.
I mean, I think it's also, it's not that we only boogie. I think and you know this, we all know this at this event, is we know the body has knowledge. We know that the body has drawn on its experience and is in tune not only with the who and the what we are, but where we are and who we're with. So the skin is not a borderline between our existence and everything else. There's a porosity between all of our information and all of who and where we are. And if we allow that to exist for us, then we can do more than play. You know, I think we can.
Yes, we can. I would say, in my language, we can be fully intelligent.
Yeah.
When we are when we've re-achieved, or perhaps achieved for the first time, I'm not sure which at the moment, a kind of optimal meshing between the sense of purposefulness, because as you say, when you talk about the urgency, the importance of urgency in movement, of course, in everyday life and in the life of your grandchildren, that is about purposefulness. It's about wanting something to be expressed, or wanting to get somewhere, or wanting to get something, to get a drink, or to get a sweet, or to find your mum, or whatever it might be. And that's our kind of fundamental state. We are seething masses of concerns and desires and fearfulness and what have you. and movement, whole body coordinated,
Mm.
skillful movement is our predominant means whereby we stand a chance of being successful around
Yes.
those agendas. And there's a third major element, which is, and we're not going to be successful. We can couple our desires, our sense of urgency with our physical capabilities, but unless we're also coupling ourselves with the world, we're going to miss the mark more often.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to be, my favorite metaphor at the moment is meshing our sense of the dwelling in the world, of being doing creatures and being driven by a range of different desires. And that somehow or other optimal intelligence is finding in every moment the best balance of these things. I think for me, like the fundamental ontological question or a scientific question or something is like, what's the best thing to do next?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
the question that we live with, not often not consciously, throughout our lives. And I think,
and how precarious we might be, because I think that idea of being precarious is also, and it's not only, I mean, we're talking about dance right now. I realize that it's crossed many other fields, but I think that idea of being precarious, but I dearly love you to get back to the idea of imagination. And sound.
Yes. Constrain me. Imagination, I think you're right to wonder whether little children have imagination in the sense that we adults think of imagination, which is to kind of conjure perceptual experiences of a world that isn't currently externally present, something like that. But I think I'm going to try and defy you by drawing imagination back to this conundrum, because I mean, I'll give you two examples, if I may. One of them may be pertinent to this audience. There is a kind of disciplined imagination. There is a use of imagination, which sports people call mental rehearsal, and I'm sure dancers would rely on that as well. I'm often reminded of the famous golfer Jack Nicklaus, who once said, before I hit every golf shot, I go to the movies in my head. And what it means is, he explains that he visualizes the ball being exactly where he wants it to be after the stroke. He visualizes, he actually sees in his mind's eye clearly the trajectory that the ball would need to follow in order to land in that optimal place. And he then recreates the feeling in his body of what the sequence, the quickly unraveling sequence of bodily sensations would be that would result in the golf shot that would launch exactly that trajectory. Now, that's an extremely disciplined and sophisticated and purpose-driven use of imagination. So I think that's one benefit. And then we have a much more dreamy or relaxed or genuinely creative form of imagination. I hope I've remembered this correctly, because looking at the people who are participating in this, I saw Rosemary Lee, and I remember, if indeed it is the same Rosemary Lee, being part of a discussion with her like many years ago, maybe 15 years ago, about learning in a whole lot of different disciplines. I may have completely misattributed this, and Rosemary, if she's still with us, can put me straight. But I think I remember her saying that when she was in the middle of choreographing a new piece, that sometimes she would have the experience of what some people call like a sort of gut feeling of nah, like that's not it. She'd be experimenting with movements of her own body, and some kind of evaluative center somewhere in her gut would be saying nah, nah. And a strategy that she had developed for herself was to throw herself down onto a pile of mattresses in the corner of her studio, snooze for 20 minutes or so. I can't remember if she actually set a timer. And then when the timer went, she trained herself to get up and dance out of her sleepiness. And often in that hyper relaxed, unthoughtful mode, her body was able to find the physical expression that she hadn't been able to find in a more alert or more awake mode. So I'm loving the idea that imagination is a suite of possibilities that we could become better or worse at. I mean, a lot of my work in education has been about how do we educate these capabilities.
Yeah.
It'd be great if schools were places that quite deliberately expanded the range and the quality of children's expertise at being world-class imaginers in a whole variety of different ways.
Oh, I think that's so good. And how, yeah, and how that gets drained out of us, like people sort of literally lift the plug and let all the childhood expertness drain down the plug hole, and we have to begin to stop that. And I feel that we all know that, but that's why I feel also there is urgency in whatever we are.
Yes.
Both from science and from the arts, and therefore from dance. There is an urgency of how we're able to put these questions and propositions out there
Yes, I was reminded when we were having a kind of dry run for these conversations, and we're way off piste as far as what we plan. To at least to some extent, of the saying of a famous Zen master, Shunryu Roshi: in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the experts there are but few. And that's the tension again, isn't it? It's like we are built to extract from our experience habits and expectations, patterns that enable us to predict and control and function well in the world, to mesh well with the world. Our major tool for doing that is to fill ourselves up with prototypes built of experience that might, they worked in the past and they might just work again here. And the challenge is not to be trapped, not to become trapped by those rigidifications of both mind and body.
But I think that's where imagination is vital. And I'm going to say for the dancer right now, because that's what we're speaking about, is if you are repeating something, a movement or a proposition or a question, by to some extent soaking it through with a slightly different imaginative tone, then inevitably the movement will alter just enough for you to learn a little bit more. And so imagination it's not about putting a photograph in your body. It's about allowing the entirety of you to imagine a different tone, a different material, a different process, and with that embodied in you, a different perspective on the movement can arise. And
you've talked about like becoming a cat. Can you say like how does that work? It's like you put the cat into your own body in some way or other.
I needed to work out a better conversation between my upper body and my lower body. My lower body practically could go, from one side of the dance studio to another by walking, and if I wasn't careful, my upper body would just sort of gesticulate, and I wasn't quite sure what was happening in between. And I had witnessed, actually, mostly dogs, but also cats, or any four-footed animal, is that their forearms and their forelegs and their rear legs are very different, but in how they hold the spine up off the floor and link the head to the tail is massively informative. So when they run, the whole thing is working together. So I got myself into a studio and I literally tried to imagine what it would be like if I could transform myself as far as I could through imagination into a cat-like figure. And I even started with the head, and I'd find my nose and head going forward and my eyes sliding to the side, which of course changed my neck. And if I changed my neck, that would enter down through my spine, and I would find my forearms going to the floor. I would get to the floor, my forearms would take the weight, which altered how my spine was organized between my atlas axis and my tailbone. And before you knew where I was a human being on all fours on the floor, but I had experienced something that has never left me. It has, if I wish to go, okay, you're a bit lost, refine that potential in me, even if it is, even if I don't look very much like a cat by the end.
That's fascinating. I think that kind of imaginatively putting yourself in the position, it's like freeing yourself up. It's almost like by adopting this persona. I'm going to put it this way for a reason, which I'll explain in a minute. That can allow you to uncover hidden resources.
Yes.
In yourself. That's a little bit about what I'm hearing you saying. And as you were talking, that reminded me of a very interesting educational process devised by, am I going to be able to remember her name? Dorothy Heathcote, possibly. The process is called Mantle of the Expert. And it's a complex role play lasting over, it could be weeks, certainly days, of involving children in a scenario in which they are invited to become, let us say, aliens or adults with specialisms that at some level they cannot possibly understand. I mean, a fairly mundane version would be, you know, like you, Robbie, you're going to be a quantity surveyor, and Miranda is going to be an architect, and someone else is going to be a brickie. And the extraordinary thing is that as children immerse themselves in these roles, as you immerse yourself in the cat, so something in them rises to the challenge. And they find themselves accessing, and not sort of fully formed, but in vestigial form, accessing some aspects of the expertise which these role models would actually possess. It's a rather alchemical process, but in a way, it's an extension of what you were talking about, maybe not in such a kind of embodied or a physical way.
I think
sorry, Sue, and I know this is going to shock you, but that is 30 minutes. Would you like to continue a little longer? I'd love for you to continue longer, but I just wanted to let you know.
I just wanted to say I think alchemy plays an important part in dance practice, but I can finish there, and I'm.
Why don't you go for another 5 or 10 minutes, and I'll interrupt again, because that's great fun. I'd love interrupting you both.
Okay. I'm wondering what if I have to put the mantle of the scientist on for me, of course I immediately become very uncomfortable with the notion of alchemy.
Yes.
And magic. So I have to start trying to reach for some more grounded, something that doesn't violate the laws of physics or chemistry to describe these things.
Yes.
But in a way, having this conversation opens that up for me, not as something that I have a ready-made answer to, but as something that will be an interesting challenge It's like, how would I, without diminishing the experience of these children becoming quantity surveyors or you becoming a cat, how could I give an account of that that was compatible with everything that we know about psychology and physiology? I don't have an answer to that, but that's the question as a scientist that I would like to take away from this. How could we begin to, like scientists seek to or want to try and explain an out-of-body experience?
Yes.
You know, am I literally up there on the ceiling looking down at myself? No, but how could I have the very real experience of that being the case?
Yes.
I think is an interesting challenge for us sciencey folk.
Well, absolutely fascinating, and I think the only thing that wells up in me right now is the idea of ritual and how rituals play a part in physical reorientation, and how that part of us which I think of as pagan, and I don't know what a scientist would think of there, but that part of us which feels ancient, that part of us which has lived for thousands of years somehow, I'm fully aware that scientifically that doesn't quite add up, but it helps me in my idea of living a particular span of life, and that my life will come to an end. But if I put that life within a much longer span of existence, somehow it feels more possible. It feels more possible to die, you see what I mean? Because I am somehow I exist within a much longer span. But that, again, that's all imagined.
I don't think of that as anti-scientific. I mean, we are, after all, evolved and continually developing characters. You know, we carry within our physiology the lessons of tens or hundreds of thousands of years of the past. So the scientific me is not uncomfortable.
Oh, okay.
At all. Of course, we have built into us, in our physiognomy, in our the fact that your forepaws and your hind paws are somewhat different from those of a whippet or a cat. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say about that, but these are, my friend Bill Lucas often says, these are all good questions.
Yes. Yeah.
He usually says that when he's fed up with answering them. They're all good questions.
Oh, with a stroking of the beard.
Exactly, a stroking of the beard.
Shall we return to Simon?
Yes, it feels to me like a place where we might open up and hear whether this has been making any sense to other people who've joined us.
Thank you both. That was a tremendous pleasure, and it did feel so weirdly short. And I apologize for that sensation from my perspective, also from yours, of interrupting as I did. And I was also hoping that you'd tell more Rosemary Lee stories, Guy. That was a tremendous.
I hope you will put me straight.
It doesn't matter if you made them up. You can make them up all you like. It's fine. Listen, the plan is to have a little break now, and that's just a chance for people to stretch their legs, but also to think about things that they might like to ask of you. So let's come back in 5 minutes, and then we'll get going with the conversation. So see you back, or you don't have to leave. You can just mute or do whatever you need to do. You can, and we'll just come back in about 5 minutes. So thanks all. See you soon. I'm going to just, if people can hear, I'm going to say, we're going to kick off. Kick off. This is, you'd be surprised to hear that this is my mother language. So we're going to get started again. And so I'm just going to allow people a chance to, I don't know whether anything changes. Well, maybe we'll just start. So maybe one way to go, I think I'm going to just, this is moderator's prerogative. And maybe just get the ball rolling, I'll ask something of you both. And then just to remind everyone else in the so want to say Zoom, in the Teams call, that you're welcome to just put your hand up if you'd like to ask something, or you can write a question in the chat and either read it out yourself or I can read it out. So whatever is the least stressful or easiest thing for you all. I'd like to, I really, just to thank you both initially. I found I have many things I would like to ask, but I'm going to just start with a kind of slightly vague question, which is, because as Sue just hinted, you've had conversations with each other before. There's let's say there's history. Where do you feel as if you most disagree, or that it's most difficult to find points of connection, or where it's most difficult to understand each other? Do such points exist?
I'm sure they do, but we haven't found any sore spots, I don't think. So have we?
No, I mean, I think it's partly, certainly from a dancer's perspective, we are interested in aligning ourselves with other different disciplines in order that one can, it doesn't have to cross-fertilize, because those things don't always happen, but to recognize maybe to recognize ourselves in others, or to be genuinely part of the wider world, rather than always in the studio or the theatre or on paper. And so we talk together, I think, in order to test the idea of being part of a much wider world. And I think there have been both people from neuroscience rather than cognitive science, or even other artists, if I talk about a dance practice, and they go, oh no, I don't agree with that at all. Visual artists will quite often go, really? But then that's part of how you work through the challenge. So I've enjoyed my conversations with Guy and with others, because it feels it's more about expansion, and sometimes refining, sometimes actually turning around and going, I've refined something through conversation.
And so please, again, I really would rather not be asking all these questions. So please, everyone, feel free to chime in. And oh, look at that, saved.
A question.
Oh, look at this, so many people now. Okay, now that's enough. Okay, so on Andrea, I can see a number 1 next to your name. Please.
Let me find my microphone. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for this. It's super exciting. I'm all up for this interdisciplinary discussions. I think it's super rich. And yeah, I did have a question. Guy, you said at one point you were saying that you were thinking as a scientist how to begin to explain things such as something like out-of-body experience and the language, and I was very interested to ask you, perhaps both of you, but I think your answer will be more mysterious for me, or like, I don't know, but is whether this need for language to explain something can go beyond areas that are perhaps less explored, such as an out-of-body experience, but maybe more of very well-established scientific concepts. Whether Siobhan Davies' language, the way that she's been, I mean, I believe you've been having different conversations at different times, and wondering if that kind of long embodied knowledge and experience and the language that she uses sort of challenges really well-established notions for you, or doubts, and whether there's a contribution that goes quite I don't know that can contribute in a very, very substantial way to the scientific, concepts and the use of language, the scientific use of language. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a risk that the language that already exists tries to colonize experiences. So the experiences get shrunk or warped in order to fit the existing language. And I don't find that very profitable. It's like a kind of imperialism of the intellect or something like that. But what I do find profitable is being presented as Sue presents me, with things that I don't immediately have a well-established or confident scientific answer to. I rather enjoy the challenge and the experience of being presented with things that are on the margins of what the science that I'm familiar with can explain. And I think that's how science grows. So you need a mixture of a kind of willingness to live with the question and a kind of honesty that is required not to leap to some pseudo-scientific description. And I find it quite comfortable and quite easy most of the time to live in that kind of hazy edge. I find it more profitable to live in that space than I do to make what for me often feels like a premature jump from the world of physics into the world of woo-woo. It's like, I don't immediately understand this, so it must be God or the devil or alchemy or some other kind of pseudo explanation for these things. I don't find that intellectually honest or satisfying to make that jump. So I stay open about the supernatural, but it's a way of thinking of last resort for me. And that to be honest, you have to have completely exhausted all other avenues of intelligent inquiry before you buy something as radically different as that, if that makes sense. But it's a personal stance. It's a personal viewpoint.
I think, thanks, Guy. Just to add in the chat at this point, it's relevant. Kerry Chappell has written, going back to the point about alchemy, I wonder if it could be about asking, how does what we know about alchemy, imagination, etc., from dance help nudge scientists to ask different types of questions, and perhaps vice versa?
Yeah, exactly. Good. It's a very nice way of putting it, Kerry. And hi, Kerry. Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of the fertile prodding of that questioning is exciting. I think it's a healthy fundamental human drive to want to explore deeper, whether that's into a cave or into the mysteries of alchemy or whatever it might be. I think it's a healthy facet of intelligence that we should enjoy living on the edge of these things. And I'm always reminded, some people object to the kind of superficial use of science, to which the famous physicist Richard Feynman once replied, I think it does no harm to the mystery to understand a little about it. So providing it's not hegemonic, our quest, then I think it's exciting and healthy.
Kat, your next cab off the rank.
Yeah, hello. Wow, thank you so much. That was incredible. And I can't wait to engage with your work a bit more, Guy. I have a couple of thoughts that really came to me that might spark something. One was, I was really struck when you were talking about your interactions with football, Guy.
Mm.
And I'm a double leg amputee and became an amputee at 18. And some years ago, I went and tried out a piece of technology that football clubs were using, Arsenal, Chelsea, the big Premier League ones. There was virtual reality. So the injured footballers would wear these virtual reality headsets, and then they would have shin pad-like things on their legs that had sensors on. And they would enter into a goal-taking virtual reality space as a way to reconnect with their embodied experience of being non-injured. And I tried that out as an amputee wearing my prosthetics, and that was a really interesting experience of achieving an imagination embodiment that was closely related to my memory of a body state. So that was one thought that came to me. And then the second one was sparked by this grappling of how science, dance, alchemy, conversations can be teased out, how we can interact with each other and understand each other. And I was thinking about a therapeutic modality that I encountered some years ago, which was called attention training, and it was delivered very much within a medical context. But it was a very interesting modality in that it asked of me to listen to audio, and it would be birds, church bells, people walking by, and it would ask me to draw out one of the sounds, draw out an individual sound, and then ask me to try and listen to them all together, which we do. And I wonder if there is something in there about accepting or working with the multiplicity of our kinesthetic experiences in the world, and that all of these things are happening at once. And so maybe there isn't such a binary of the foregrounded, backgrounded, but that actually there is an alchemical process happening all the time, which takes in the fundamental chemicals or materials that are being melded together and is always situated in the time and space. So always adding in heat or air or they were just two thoughts that I wanted to share.
Oh, I don't want to hog the limelight. Sue, do you have a response?
I was going to very quickly go back to that Feynman, like, if there is no harm in knowing a little about something quite large. I can't remember what it's the detail. So either imaginatively or no, I'm going to start again. In the details of an action and all the anatomical information that might be resourced from that small action, cellular, atomic, biological, all of those things are feeding that action. All the sciences are making that movement happen, let alone the person you are, the situation you're in, and the imagination you bring to bear. So the minutiae of a scientific activity happening within your body is feeds or is part of, it's just part of, it doesn't feed, it is part of everything else that is in play. And I think I am in wonder when I really imagine that. And maybe by being in an act of wonder, one is a little bit closer to something like alchemy, or something like, it is so, in a way, it is so unbelievable that it's quite hard for all of me to accept. And yet I can be on the borders of trying to accept that, and it's extraordinary.
Oh, lots of thoughts from me. I think for me, a kind of guiding notion here is a realization of how deeply, and for the most part unconsciously, we are creatures shaped, formed, deformed, and limited by habit. And I think a lot, for me, one of the guiding questions here is, what kind of experiences enable us to recapture possibilities, for example, possibilities of movement that we've forgotten that we had, that we've developed, we've become captured by a suit, so to speak, of habits. The kinds of things that Alexander Technique and Feldenkrais and other forms of physical therapy tackle. The sorts of virtual reality things that you were talking about, Kathleen, I don't have much experience of those, but extraordinary experiences can be had of changing body identity and so on. So, I'd be very interested to hear more about how clearly some kind of experiences that you were able to have with this technology were kind of slightly akin to, but importantly different from, phantom limb experiences, and what that is all about. So I don't know as much as I'd like about virtual reality. The renewed interest in psychedelics, of course, is and the therapeutic use of microdosing as a way of breaking free of perceptual habits. Like we're completely unconscious of how captured we are by perceptual habits, because those habits are the things through which we see. Like we don't see, they are the machinery that construct our reality. So it is very difficult for us to become aware of the machinery that enables us to be aware. We see through them rather than at them. They don't become objects. So various forms of meditation, for example, as well as psychedelics, try and get us back closer to, as it were, jump upstream of some of those habits. I've often used the image of like moving the cursor of consciousness progressively closer to a more primitive, less interpreted version of our reality. And I think drug experiences and virtual reality experiences and so on are very interesting prostheses, to use a word that you'll be familiar with, that enable us to recapture some of that fluidity and some of that joy, that we'd forgotten that we could boogie. So it's a fascinating. If I was 40 years younger, that would be a massively fascinating research life for me to have, but sadly I'm not. But that sort of, just the last thing, another word that came up for me when Sue and I were talking previously, it's as if, it's like, if we're interested in it, there are things that we can do, forms of awareness or techniques or processes that we can do to try and not prevent this process of ossification of what was supple is becoming gradually more rigid, but to keep reminding ourselves that there are other options, beyond those options of unconscious habit. And that's probably what keeps us young as we get older, if we can retain that mindset.
Thank you so much. Lovely question and responses. Erica, I can imagine you've been waiting so patiently in your discombobulating state of being unverified. And so we look forward to your question now.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this lovely privilege of listening this afternoon. It's been lovely. Forgive my incapacity to be able to ask a short question, but Guy and Sue, if I can take you back to 2000, and I first encountered a book, Guy, that you edited with Terry Atkinson called The Intuitive Practitioner, on the value of not knowing what one is doing. Never as a book title so accurately described how I operate in the dance studio. And you know, the way that Jill unpacked it also, I feel, is still very present today in the work that many of us do. So you talk about the anatomy of intuition, and my question is, do you think intuition is at risk in our increasingly, and I'm using an expression that I first heard Simon use, the increasingly datafication of the world, and this tense relationship we have with not doing anything until the data says it's okay, and then doing something because we have an instinct or we intuit into thinking, yes, this feels right.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The world is both safer and poorer as a result of the marginalization of intuition. It's safer because intuition can be and often is wrong. It's not an infallible source. It's to the kind of uncritical glorification of my gut feeling. I always follow my gut. Is your gut can be wrong. Your gut can be functioning on the basis of distant memories of experiences in very different times and places that no longer obtain in your life, but which continue to exert an intuitive hold over you. But it's poorer because intuition can also intimate to you things that may not yet have been articulated in the bright light of the intellect. There's some very interesting research on children's gesturing, for example, in educational settings. If you make 6-year-olds sit on their hands whilst they're trying to explain some mathematical or logical problem to you, they appear to be less advanced in their understanding than if they're allowed to gesture. Number one. Number two, gestures often carry an element of insight which is not yet sufficiently crystallized into words. Number two. Number three, teachers who at some level are more sensitive to their students, their children's gesture, are better teachers because they are more able to sense when a child is on the brink of a new understanding. And so their teachable interventions can be more timely and more well tailored. So I think that's a very nice example of how of not denying or not removing these, more broadly what I think of as other ways of knowing, through, you know, it's like our knowledge manifests through the tears from our eyes. It manifests through the experience of being moved or touched. I've just been reading a book called With the End in Mind about dying by a palliative physician, Catherine Mannix. It's an extraordinary book, and I would defy anybody to read it without weeping. And that is a form of understanding. It's a form of engagement with that information which is incredibly powerful and veridical and accurate and useful. Yet you don't hear much about that in the classroom. You don't hear much about that in the doctor's consulting room. So the kind of marginalization, it's very understandable that intuition has got squeezed out by the risk of litigation. That's a big part of the denigration of our minds by our culture. You know, if an experienced midwife says, you know, I have a feeling that we'll be okay. I don't think, let's not call for the ambulance just yet at a home birth, and things go wrong, she's very liable. She's very vulnerable now because she didn't have the data. So we can get trapped into a more superficial intellectual world. I mean, all those machines are incredibly useful and incredibly valuable, and so is experienced intuition. Providing the experience on which that intuition is based is indeed comparable to the situation that you're facing at the moment. But if it's an echo of an old hurt, you're likely to run away from intimacy while understanding that that's exactly what you need.
Can I just, that was so good to listen to. I'm going to just spring forward where an intuitive response might does exist when an artist is performing. Because I think the information that they have drenched themselves with in the preparation, the research for the performance, the doing of the movement, the repeating of the movement, the trying to find variations of the movement, understanding what the movement is, why it is, where it is, your mood, and all of those things, the research has thoroughly explored the domain of a particular kind of movement. But in the act of performing, all of that information may not be immediately available and doable because it's so complex. So at that point, the dancer intuits the best of that material in the situation that they are in with the people that they are, and they accomplish that through a form of intuition, but which is well, the pre-information has been well composted.
Yes.
So that the compost of that information becomes a nutrient for the doing in the moment.
Absolutely. And we're all too familiar with the fact that virtuosity falters when you think too much. You know, when you're trying to remember or rehearse or ground it. There's a nice study of people who were taught to putt, golf putting, either with lots of helpful instructions or purely just learning purely through having a go at it. And then they were put in a stressful situation where some famous golfer came in and they were going to be judged on the success of their putting. And it won't surprise you as dancers to know that the people who had the conscious understanding went to pieces much worse than the people who just learned to putt, because put under stress, most of their attention was going into trying to remember what they were supposed to be doing and depleting the attention that was going into the bodily process of hitting this stupid little ball.
Thank you both. Sarah?
I'm wondering whether Rosie's got something that would follow up from that, because I would go off at a bit of a tangent. No. I've been wondering how to say this because it sounds as if I'm almost going into woo-woo land, but not really. As one who's actually spent most of her life as both a practitioner and an academic of sorts, a scholar, if you like, of trying to find a way of languaging the very subtle pre-verbal or pre-reflective experiences that actually give rise to my thought actually, and my work, my digital work. I don't deal with flesh. I deal with kind of reducing that to some kind of sense of energy, if you like. That's what my work was about. And it's this idea of we're constantly trying to language things that are almost impossible, maybe impossible to grasp in language. And it might, I mean, Bergson puts this so much better than I, because this has been guiding me for most of my career. I think I came across this back in the late 90s, probably. And he talks of non-verbal understandings, which I call pre-reflective understanding, offer a richer understanding than the word, whose well-defined outlines overwhelm or at least cover up the delicate and fugitive impressions of our individual consciousness. And that for me has driven me, and I still haven't found a way of truly getting across these. I can feel them. You can see I'm doing it. It's sort of like, oh, it's here in the palm of my hand, but finding a language for it, is it essential, or is that what we do when we dance, when we make this kind of work that is beyond the reflective consciousness, if you like?
Sue, would you like to lead on this one?
Certainly don't want to lead, but I've got, there's I'm not going to get the quote right, a Don Patterson essay lecture in which he says something like this: when you look out of the window, there is no stone or rock or branch, which is simply its name. So we are, you know, we can see the rock. The moment you look at the rock, it becomes so much else, everything about it. So I think we shouldn't shy away from the fact that words are massively useful, but don't express everything in when they are sprung out of the mouth. So as long as we keep appreciating the usefulness of words, but that we take the time occasionally, and I think poetry is extraordinary in this way, because of how it re-choreographs the word structure, somehow manage to juxtapose one sound and word against another, which allows us to re-see and re-feel the subject that the poem is about. So I think it may be that our appreciation of words needs to go through some kind of alteration to know that a word means so much more. It gathers to it so much more than that.
And that's where poetry does come in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's nuanced, it's so nuanced. And I think that's maybe what I'm after, is trying to find nuanced language.
Yes.
That gives
it also trips us up.
Yes.
It sort of trips us up and goes, I've never thought of a tree like that, or whatever else it is.
Yeah.
So then I do feel that layering, the complexity that arrives out of layering ideas feels more real to me than linear. And of course, inevitably, words are linear, one follows the other.
So the person who I found most helpful in trying to wrestle with this one, Sarah, is a man called Eugene Gendlin. Have you come across his work?
No, I haven't.
He was
Gendling with a G or a J?
With a G.
G.
I think it's a soft. Some people say Gendlin, but I think it's a soft G.
Okay.
He's a philosopher and a psychotherapist, and he was working at the University of Chicago a long time ago now. He died just a few years ago, trying to identify what it was that distinguished, and I have to lapse into American English here, people who were winning in psychotherapy from those who weren't, people who were making progress. And what was it about the therapeutic interaction, hundreds of hours of videotaping interactions to try and see if there was a magic ingredient. And long story short, it turned out that it was nothing whatsoever to do with the school of the therapist, firstly. Secondly, it was very little to do with the personality of the therapist. Thirdly, it was quite a lot to do with whether the client spontaneously lapsed into a kind of thinking or a kind of talking which was hazy and tentative.
Yeah.
It was as if, and he developed a metaphor of like learning to talk to and listen to, I rather like this expression, the child in your chest. And so there's a lot of, one of Gendlin's students, as Gendlin was trying to explain this to him, said, "Oh, Professor Gendlin, you mean it's when you have to do a lot of umming and erring?" And Gendlin said, "Yes, that's exactly it." And it turned out that that kind of slow, hesitant, exploratory feeling for the right words and having a quite acute sense, and I referred to a little while ago, earlier on, it's like something in your physically, when you produce a form of words, you're trying to explain a feeling or a predicament or whatever it might be, there's this little signal coming from your tummy that is either going yes or nah. And when you do get it right, when the words are, as the French would say, les mots justes, then you get that. It's as if the child in your chest feels heard. And one of the ways he describes this process is in terms of a metaphor that I have used in the Intelligence in the Flesh book. That there's kind of the way you described it very nicely, as if our experience kind of unfurls inside us a bit like a fern. And gradually this holistic but inchoate, pre-verbal, I think was your word, inchoate sense of what it is that wanted to be said or wanted to be heard gradually takes shape. I love this, the image in my mind of a time-lapse film of a fern uncurling, and it uncurls into gesture, it uncurls into words, it uncurls into posture, it uncurls into all the different branches of the fern that we manifest as. And this focus process that he called focusing originally is one of learning to slow down that process of unfurling so that you can catch more of the wholeness of what it was that wanted to be said with the right words. But it takes time and it takes physiological attention to be able to have that moment of yes, that's right. Those are the right words. And he later in his life, he went on to develop this out of a therapeutic context to talk about creativity. He developed a process that I call TATE. The acronym is TATE, and my wife used to work at the TATE. So thinking at the edge of our understanding. And it's applying the same kind of mental mode, if you like, of learning to hang out attentively and patiently as a slow process of germination or gestation, we might say, happens within you. And if you try and rush it, if you try and give a forceps delivery to your growing, developing understanding, it'll come out abused in some way or other. It won't quite do justice to the feeling that you had. So if that's resonating with the issue that you were talking about, if I'm managing to connect with that, I strongly recommend have a look at the work of Eugene Gendlin.
I will, thank you. You remind me of your first book that I came across, which was Hair, Brain, Tortoise, Mind.
Ah, yes.
Kind of going back.
Yeah, definitely. There's a bit about focusing in that book, I think. I usually manage to squeeze in something about focusing. It's a very interesting process. It's like you're doing it right when you don't know whether you're doing it right or not. Because it requires you to kind of hang out in that sort of subtle misty, physicalized zone of your being, but it works. It's amazing. And that's a form of alchemy, which I can perfectly well explain in terms of scientific physiology.
I'm grateful that we now understand that alchemy is a thing and that it exists. That's my take-home message from this conversation. Rosie, I know you had your yellow hand. Are you sure? I thought maybe you were going to have a nap and then come back after you'd figured it all out, after you'd had a little sleep on the studio. Everyone, okay, thanks, Rosie. Thank you, Guy and Sue. Thank you enormously for your wisdom and playfulness and intuitions, and also tremendous experience that you've brought to this conversation. Thanks to everyone who's been here and who is still here. These things don't happen without you, and it's an absolute pleasure, if I can speak on behalf of Lily and me, to have welcomed you here, and look forward to seeing you in the new year when we touch down on the body and land. So thank you once again, Guy and Sue, and thanks everyone. Let's finish it right there.
Thank you, and thank you, Simon. It's been a real pleasure to talk and think with such an interesting group of people, and especially with my friend Sue.
Thanks. More chats, Guy.
More chat.